Hey guys, tonight we're sailing straight into the smoky heart of a 17th century dockside tavern. There's shouting, clinking mugs, and the air smells like seawater and sweat-soaked wool. You're squeezing past rum-sloshed pirates with gold hoop earrings and suspicious bulges in their coats, ducking splinters from a ceiling beam held up by wishful thinking. Outside, waves lap against the hulls of anchored ships, some barely floating. Inside, captains lean over tables littered with maps and stained ledgers, whispering about storm damage, cannonballs to the hull, and oddly specific insurance payouts. You might think pirates wouldn't need insurance, what with the pillaging and lawlessness and whatnot, but surprise! In the 1600s, even cutthroats had paperwork, especially when they wanted to protect their stolen loot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push through the haze and join a small group in the corner. The pirate captain at the center of it all isn't some caricature with a parrot and a hook. He's more accountant than adventurer. He's got ink-stained fingers and a furrowed brow. He's bargaining not over treasure, but over terms. A merchant sits across from him, nervously tapping a quill, while an old sea lawyer acts as go-between. They're working out a deal. If the captain's cargo is lost to storms or raids, the merchant pays out an agreed sum. That's your first glimpse of pirate insurance. Loose, verbal, sealed with rum and handshakes. Not legally binding in any court of law, but plenty enforceable at cutlass point. This is the Caribbean, 1671. Port Royal, Jamaica, to be exact. Known back then as the wickedest city on earth, and not just because of the brothels or stolen Spanish silver, it was also a hotspot for pirate commerce. Historians still argue whether it was pirates or the merchants who ran the place. The line was, let's say, very porous. In this world, insurance wasn't just for merchant ships. Pirates needed it too. Their vessels were often overloaded with goods, molasses, tobacco, textiles, even enslaved people, and the risks were enormous. You weren't just worried about storms or shipworms. You had to factor in betrayal, mutiny, or a surprise Spanish galleon with a grudge. So naturally, some enterprising minds began offering coverage, crude but effective. And here's the twist. Many of these policies weren't filed in London or Amsterdam but scribbled down right here, in dim corners like this. Local merchants or fence-like traders would back pirate voyages in exchange for a hefty return. If the ship sank or was captured, the backer would cough up an agreed sum, or risk a powder keg temper from a returned, broke pirate. You watch as the pirate signs with a thumbprint. He can't read, but he sure knows what 10% off the top means. A toothless man sitting nearby is acting as witness, nodding solemnly while casually palming a dagger. There's no such thing as third-party arbitration here, unless you count duels at dawn. Now, don't go thinking this was just drunken bravado. There was a real logic to it. These pirates weren't reckless. They were investors in high-risk ventures. In fact, many of them were former privateers, once sanctioned by governments to plunder enemy ships legally. When peace came, they didn't suddenly turn into farmers. They kept raiding, just with less paperwork. That didn't stop them from craving security. A quirky twist? Some pirates actually insured their crews. A few captains promised payouts to sailors injured or maimed in action, sort of a proto-health plan. Lose an arm in a raid? That's 20 silver pieces. Lose an eye? Historians still argue whether this was altruism, reputation maintenance, or just a smart way to keep morale high when cannonballs started flying. Back to the tavern. The deal is sealed with a loud cheer and 3 shared swigs from a flask that could strip barnacles off a hull. The merchant gets a hastily signed receipt, shoved into a wax-sealed tube for safekeeping. He'll carry it back to his contact in Bridgetown, who probably has a cousin in London waiting to hear whether this voyage will sink or pay. Your captain rises, satisfied. He's just ensured that if his ship doesn't make it back, someone else will foot the bill. And the merchant? He's betting on the pirate's success, not out of trust, but because he knows the pirate's more likely to collect treasure if he thinks someone's got his back. As the night rolls on, the tavern buzzes with more deals. Some include secret codes, verbal phrases, even slivers of maps, strange, fragmented proof to avoid paper trails. Insurance in this world is risky, personal, and steeped in paranoia. You start to notice that most of these arrangements rely on memory, intimidation, and mutually assured destruction. No wonder pirate captains kept ledgers hidden in double-bottom chests. You eventually step outside, the moon casting silver shadows on the cobbled street. A one-eyed sailor mutters to himself about a Spanish brigantine he swears he saw yesterday, vanished now, as if swallowed by the sea. You realize then, every ship is a ghost until it returns, and every insurance claim is a story waiting to be believed. You wake to the scrape of gulls and the scent of low tide. The dock's quieter now, but just a few paces from where you started, a different kind of business unfolds in a cramped upstairs office that smells like mildew and spilled ink. Here, insurance isn't shouted over rum, it's written with precision. Sort of. You climb a narrow staircase and push open the creaky door. Inside, two men lean over a warped desk. A pirate captain fresh from sea and a local scribe with spectacles too big for his face. They're drafting a document that might save, or doom, the next voyage. This is where policies are born, not in pristine corporate offices, but in humid rooms where parchment curls and every quill stroke carries risk. The scribe, probably half drunk and half literate, mumbles through a familiar clause about perils of the sea, a phrase so vague it could cover everything from shipwrecks to sea monster attacks. And yes, that was once invoked. Historians still argue whether kraken damage was ever seriously considered, or just a pirate's excuse after a drunken cannon accident. Your captain adds a few personal flourishes. Payment shall be void if Captain Hornigold is drunk at the wheel. Probably a joke. Probably. Still, it gets written down, and that's the point. These policies mix the formal with the absurd. Written in blood? Sometimes. More often, written with rum stains on the page and thumbprints pressed hard enough to tear the parchment. Unlike today's slick contracts, these pirate-era policies are a mad blend of business, superstition, and street-level enforcement. No notaries. No regulatory boards. Just reputations and the occasional knife fight. But make no mistake, this paperwork had teeth. Breach it, and the consequences were fast and very personal. Take the case of the Crimson Lily, a brigantine that sailed out of Tortuga in 1675. The captain insured the ship against loss by tempest, fire, and villainy of foreign powers, which sounded proper enough, until it turned out he was the foreign power, having looted his own ship off the coast of Hispaniola. The insurer, a disgraced Dutch merchant, claimed fraud. The pirates claimed strategic redirection of assets. Guess who won? Hint, not the guy without a cannon. You glance around the office again. Along one wall are crude filing cabinets stuffed with ship manifests, cargo lists, and a few scrawled notes that look more like poems than contracts. The scribe explains that policies often included testimonials from crew or dockside witnesses who were paid in coin or booze to confirm the terms. You wonder how many of those witnesses remembered anything the next morning. Still, the system worked, sort of. Pirates had to balance two conflicting instincts: screw over the merchant and keep him happy enough to fund the next trip. So these handwritten policies were the fragile trust between them. And sometimes, just sometimes, the language was weirdly poetic. One you skim reads, "Should Poseidon himself claim the hull, the bearer of this writ shall not weep, for gold shall be made whole by land-bound hand." That's basically, if the ship sinks, I get paid, but with bonus drama. And while some contracts were bare bones, others got fancy. Wealthier captains, especially those who'd once served as privateers, began working with actual underwriters, men tied, however loosely, to emerging insurance networks in London or Amsterdam. These policies were better drafted and occasionally referenced specific shipping laws. The captains had to lie, of course, declaring themselves traders or mercantile agents, but no one looked too closely as long as the premiums were paid. A mainstream historical gem. In 1688, The infamous pirate Henry Every reportedly secured a policy through a broker who had no idea he was insuring a man planning to rob the Grand Mogul's treasure fleet. That robbery would spark an international diplomatic crisis, and a lot of panicked backpedaling in London's insurance circles. Some policies, it turns out, were better left unfiled. The fringe tidbit? Some pirates kept multiple, conflicting insurance policies on the same cargo. It was called double booking, and it worked surprisingly well until two insurers tried to collect on the same wreck and discovered each other. One incident led to a drunken brawl in Bridgetown where both claimants ended up marooned by their own clients. Petty revenge is a seafaring tradition. Back in your little office, the scribe pours sand over the fresh ink, then gently rolls up the parchment and slides it into a leather tube. He fastens it with string and a crude wax seal. The captain grabs it and tucks it into his coat, near his pistol. That's not symbolic. It's just the safest place to store anything of value on a pirate. Outside, the dock creaks under the weight of cargo being loaded. Crates of sugar, barrels of gunpowder, a suspiciously squirming burlap sack no one wants to talk about. The policy, if it holds up, will cover all of this. But as the captain boards, you can't help but notice something strange. He hands a second, identical document to a young boy waiting on the shore. A backup. Insurance for the insurance. Because here's the truth, no one really trusted anyone, not fully. Insurance wasn't just about recovering loss. It was a form of leverage, a way to lock the other party into a fragile peace. If the ship didn't return, the merchant might send someone looking. If the cargo did return, the pirate might owe more than just gold. He might owe proof. As the sun dips below the waterline, painting the sky in bruised orange and purple, the ship slips out of harbor. You watch it vanish into the haze, parchment secured in the captain's coat, bound for either glory or disaster. And back in the office, the scribe begins a new page, mumbling under his breath, "Perils of the sea, again." You're on a carriage now, bumping through muddy London streets, far from the palm trees and salt-slick decks of Port Royal. The year's 1682, and it's raining, because of course it is. The city smells like wet wool, coal smoke, and ambition. You step down outside a nondescript building in the heart of the city, a place with no flashy signs but plenty of traffic. This, oddly enough, is the beating heart of pirate insurance, a coffee house. Inside, you're enveloped by the earthy aroma of roasted beans and the low drone of dozens of conversations, each layered over the next like a sea shanty sung by 100 different crews. This is Lloyd's Coffee House. Yes, that Lloyd's, and the men here aren't just sipping coffee. They're betting on ships, on weather, on life and death. And they're betting on pirates, too. The walls are lined with chalkboards covered in scribbles. Ship names, destinations, known cargo. A tall man with a quill behind one ear reads a letter aloud, projecting like a theater actor. Brig Dolphin departed Calais en route to St. Kitts. Cargo: tobacco, molasses, and French wine. Risk rated moderate. Seeking 6 underwriters at 10% each. And before the sentence is even finished, men begin scribbling their names beneath the listing, pledging their shares. These are underwriters, risk merchants, essentially, and they've made an art out of guessing which ships will float home with riches and which will feed the fish. You squeeze into a space near the window and listen as another listing is read. Privateer Mercy's Fangs, departing Tortuga. Letter of marque in hand. Seeking coverage against Spanish retribution. One man chuckles and signs his name with a flourish, only if they don't drink all their powder again. This isn't a room full of fools. These underwriters may wear powdered wigs and act refined, but they know exactly who their clients are. Pirates, privateers, it's a blurry line, and no one here is paid to squint. As long as the premiums roll in and the ships return, no one asks whether that merchant vessel with the skull banner is flying the truth. The real power here is that chalkboard. It's not just a list of ships, it's a proto-database, a living spreadsheet that gets updated by runners, letters, and rumor. One underwriter, a narrow-eyed man with a habit of chewing the ends of his gloves, has memorized entire voyages. He knows which captains drink, which lie, which ones mysteriously lose ships only when they're 3 weeks overdue with a suspicious amount of cargo. He calls it instinct. His apprentice calls it anxiety. Either way, he rarely loses money. A mainstream historical fact. By the late 17th century, places like Lloyd's were already formalizing how they assessed risk. Pirates weren't officially listed on every policy, but privateers were, and privateers often dipped into piracy when things got tight. Everyone knew it. In fact, many underwriters even kept dossiers on captains, bad temperament, trustworthy crew, has a cousin in customs. It was the earliest form of actuarial profiling. But here's your quirky fringe tidbit. Some underwriters wore disguises when dealing with known pirates. One man allegedly donned a false mustache and called himself Mr. Bilge whenever negotiating high-risk policies. Partially for deniability. Partially because pirates have excellent memories. You watch a heated exchange unfold near the fireplace. A portly merchant accuses an underwriter of insuring a villain. The underwriter, unfazed, calmly replies, "Villains pay up front." That's the golden rule in this place. Morality is negotiable, but premiums are not. At the far end of the room, a locked cabinet houses sealed policies, some sent by mail from Jamaica or Nassau, often months delayed. If you're lucky, the ship hasn't already sunk by the time the paperwork arrives. And if you're really lucky, the insurer hasn't already gone bankrupt or mysteriously vanished on holiday to Spain. You edge closer to one particular document, left open on a table for copying. It reads like a legal puzzle, coverage granted to the vessel silent virtue for losses due to tempest, fire, hostile engagement with known enemies, or divine wrath. That last one? It's vague on purpose. If you're going to lie about a claim, better make room for miracles. Historians still argue whether the men at Lloyd's knew how much fraud was involved. Some say they were willfully blind. Others believe they were complicit, part of a sprawling network of colonial-era organized crime wearing respectable suits. After all, who do you think invested in those slaving ships? Those sugar plantations? Those pirate expeditions? You lean against a pillar as a messenger bursts through the door, soaked and breathless, clutching a crumpled letter. News from the Hollow Queen, missing off Barbados. Suspected foul play. The chalkboard gets updated. Some men mutter. One underwriter calmly scratches a note into his ledger, calculating loss. Another sighs and finishes his coffee, already thinking about the next risk. There's no time to grieve in this business, only time to reassess premiums. You step outside, head spinning. Rain drizzles down your cloak as you glance up at the dull gray sky. Behind you, the quiet roar of coffeehouse chatter continues like the heartbeat of an empire built on guesses and gambles. You now understand that piracy wasn't just bloody battles and treasure maps, it was also ledgers, percentages, and men in powdered wigs silently praying that Captain Mudd didn't spend his payout before the ship sank. The surprising truth? Pirates may have sailed with cutlasses and muskets, but their lifelines were written in contracts. And every time a ship disappeared into fog, a dozen men in London leaned forward in their chairs, hoping it wouldn't be their signature under the chalk. You find yourself pacing the low-lit corridors of a musty warehouse near the London docks, where the true theater of pirate insurance plays out, not with gunpowder, but with parchment and persuasion. It's here, not on the high seas, where insurance claims are actually filed, and believe it or not, pirates knew exactly how to stage them. The doors creak open to reveal a space filled with crates, coils of rope, and a long table surrounded by scribes, agents, and the occasional sailor who smells like he hasn't seen land or soap in months. You step inside just as a weathered man in a tattered coat drops a soggy satchel onto the desk with a dramatic thud. "Proof of loss," he declares. This is the pirate version of a claims department. Filing an insurance claim in the 17th century wasn't so different in structure from today, except it involved more bribery, more rum, and occasionally, the threat of being shoved into the Thames. The claimant would present a sworn account of the voyage, what was loaded, where it went wrong, and who was to blame. The goal? Convince the insurers that the loss was real, and more importantly, covered. You watch as the clerk opens the satchel and pulls out a soggy logbook, some half-charred parchment, and, most helpfully, a small sack of ruined coffee beans. "Ship was boarded, holds set aflame," the sailor explains. "Captain fought him off, but the cargo's fish food now. He says this with the solemn dignity of a man who absolutely set his own holds on fire. Here's the rub. Pirate claims were often technically valid but factually debatable. You could declare a loss due to weather when, in fact, it was due to poor aim during a celebratory cannon salute. Or you could say, attacked by hostile vessel, when really, it was your drunk quartermaster running the ship aground while chasing a mermaid he swore was waving at him. Historians still argue whether pirate captains filed these claims in good faith or whether the entire process was just theater for financial gain. One camp believes pirates genuinely sought security for dangerous ventures. Another insists the whole thing was a ruse to extract cash from naive merchants and distant underwriters. Back in the warehouse, the scribe starts scribbling the claim into a large ledger, asking for details: port of origin, cargo inventory, cause of damage, witness statements. The sailor squints and says, "Well, the rum was intact, but emotionally, I'd say we all suffered." He smiles. The scribe doesn't. A mainstream historical fact. Pirate ships often kept meticulous cargo manifests, not because they loved bureaucracy, but because it made claims more convincing. Captains like Bartholomew Roberts and William Kidd maintained surprisingly organized logs. If you're going to bluff your way into a payout, it helps to look official. And speaking of official, some pirates even carried forged sea passes and shipping licenses to bolster their legitimacy. You spot one pinned to a bulletin board, a Spanish pass, complete with royal seal and a signature that absolutely reads, "Don something or other." The details don't matter, just the appearance of legality. The fringe tidbit in this scene? Sometimes pirates faked damage to their ships to file a claim without actually losing anything. They'd dock with singed sails and a sob story, all while their real loot was stashed on a second vessel headed the opposite way. One legendary case involved a captain who filed for the loss of 40 barrels of sugar, only to be caught a month later selling that same sugar under a different name in a nearby port. His punishment? He was forced to reimburse the insurer and then hired for the next voyage. You lean over the scribe's shoulder as he summarizes the event in dry language. Asterisk, cargo partially destroyed. Remaining goods unsellable due to seawater taint and prolonged exposure. Ship hull compromised. Asterisk translated? Someone dropped a lantern, got scared, and dumped half the cargo to cover it up. Claims often included witness accounts, so the sailor gestures toward a wiry teenager standing nearby, nodding nervously. That's Eli. He saw the whole thing. The clerk narrows his eyes and asks, "And Eli, how many barrels did you say were lost?" The boy freezes. Definitely all of them." The pause. "Except the ones we drank." The room goes still for a moment, then erupts in restrained laughter. Even the clerk smiles. Sometimes honesty really is disarming. And here's the secret sauce to it all. These claims worked because no one really wanted to investigate too deeply. If the policy was properly filed, the premium paid, and the claimant still alive to tell the tale, odds were decent they'd get some form of payout. Not full, never full, but enough to sail again. And that was the goal. The system wasn't built on trust, it was built on momentum. Pirates knew this. They didn't need to win every claim, just enough of them to keep the sails patched and the crew paid. They were like gamblers who also owned part of the casino. And every claim, true, false, or somewhere in between, was another spin of the wheel. Outside, a runner arrives with a sealed envelope. The scribe opens it and reads aloud. The underwriters have agreed to pay 2/3 of the declared value, minus adjustments. The sailor pumps his fist. "Fair," he says, already thinking about how to spend it. "Back to Nassau then." You follow him out into the gray daylight, passing others waiting in line, each with a different tale of shipwreck, ambush, betrayal, or just bad luck. Some will get paid. Some will get laughed out of the room. A few might disappear entirely. But all of them play the game because the alternative, sailing uninsured into a sea full of storm clouds and cannons, is worse. And as your boots splash through the puddles, you realize something strange. In a world of outlaws and liars, pirate insurance was oddly predictable. Not honest, necessarily, but reliable in its own chaotic way. You're back in the Caribbean now, where insurance claims take a sunnier, but no less shady, turn. The port town of Port Royal bustles beneath a blistering sun, its streets jammed with fishmongers, gamblers, and half-sober sailors. But behind the facade of raucous taverns and church bells clanging for nobody in particular, a quieter world hums. A network of brokers, middlemen, and not-so-legal intermediaries who specialize in one thing: getting pirate claims approved fast. You duck into a shaded side alley where a man in a faded waistcoat leans against a post, flipping a coin and scanning passers-by. He's not a pirate, not quite a merchant either. He's something else, a facilitator. You nod, and he nods back, motioning you inside. No password needed, just a look that says I know something needs laundering. This man is part of the informal claims economy, a back-channel system that helps pirates file insurance claims without drawing too much attention or asking too many questions. The trick is making the claim look official even if the voyage never happened, or the ship wasn't technically legal, or the insured cargo included stolen textiles from a Portuguese frigate. You sit as he unrolls a canvas tube containing 3 ship manifests, all from the same vessel but with slightly different dates. Pick whichever sounds more plausible, he says with a grin. This is where it gets creative. You see, not every pirate was comfortable walking into an office and declaring, "I've been robbed, and I'd like my money now, please." Many used proxies, often paid locals or retired sailors with cleaner reputations, to present claims on their behalf. These proxies would file the paperwork, answer any follow-up questions, and, if pressed, swear they were on board. For the right price, they'd even cry a little. A mainstream historical fact? This tactic wasn't just for pirates. Legitimate traders, too, frequently used proxies to navigate colonial red tape and manipulate the insurance markets. But pirates elevated it into an art form, creating paper trails so dense and inconsistent that even the most diligent underwriter would give up halfway and just sign the check. Your facilitator peers at you with a knowing look. The trick, he says, is including just enough truth to anchor the lie. He points to a fabricated claim of a storm near the Cayman Islands. While the ship didn't actually sink, there was a real hurricane that season. Tie your fiction to real weather patterns, and suddenly it sounds like memory, not fraud. Historians still argue whether these intermediaries were merely opportunists or actual innovators in the early insurance landscape. Some credit them with laying the groundwork for modern claims adjusters. Others say they were con artists with quills. Honestly, both things can be true. You follow your facilitator to a second room, where a group of scribes hunched over low tables are copying policy texts by hand. They're using a kind of insurance Mad Lib system. They swap out ship names, modify the date of departure, and tailor the loss to the current political climate. Spanish raiders becomes unidentified brigantine. Cannon fire becomes structural stress due to prolonged wave impact. It's fraud with flair. The fringe tidbit? Some of these scribes were once clergy. Trained in Latin, calligraphy, and storytelling, they'd fallen from grace, or been pushed, and now turned their holy talents to ghostwriting pirate losses. One even wrote fake letters from grieving widows to help drive sympathy-based payouts. And this worked. The insurers back in Europe weren't blind, but they were thousands of miles and many months away. A convincingly formatted claim, paired with an account from a proxy and maybe a bribe or two, often made its way through the system. It helped that many insurers had no appetite for lawsuits across the ocean. Better to pay a reduced claim than deal with months of legal wrangling, or worse, getting on the wrong side of someone with a ship full of cannons and nothing to lose. As you listen, a runner bursts in winded. New news from Havana. Spanish galleon down off St. Lucia, cargo lost. One of the scribes perks up. Perfect timing, he mutters, then begins editing a claim to include plausible debris sightings and a supposed survivor who just washed up near Kingston. Your facilitator offers you a bottle of something strong and amber-colored. To well-timed catastrophes, he says with a wink. You clink the bottle against his, a little disturbed by how casual this all feels. But then again, piracy itself isn't casual, it's calculated chaos, with insurance serving as the polite, bureaucratic mask worn over its bloody grin. Outside, the port echoes with the groans of ships being unloaded and the cheers of drunken crews. But inside this modest, heat-warped office, Fortunes are being manufactured, losses repackaged, and paper soaked in more lies than ink. Some claims will get through. Some won't. But enough of them will. That's what keeps the wheels turning. One last thing catches your eye before you go. A small wooden box labeled rejections. Inside are crumpled papers, all returned from European underwriters with notes like lack of supporting evidence or inconsistent manifest data. Your facilitator shrugs. Even the best lies don't land every time. But hey, 2 out of 5 is still profit. You leave the office a little wiser and a little more cynical, the scent of ink and rum clinging to your clothes. You've now seen the middle layer of the pirate insurance world. The part that works the angles, tweaks the numbers, and knows exactly which lies are worth telling. The sun beats down on your back as you step onto the scorched, dusty roads of Nassau. Once a fishing outpost, now a pirate republic in everything but name. This isn't just a port, it's a full-on anarchic startup nation run by captains, drunk cartographers, and merchants who pretend not to see what's being unloaded from those suspiciously fast schooners. Here, the line between trade and theft is thinner than the paper used for insurance contracts. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the rituals of loss verification, because even in a place where rules are mostly theoretical, some semblance of proof is still required to get paid. You're following a young clerk now, his arms full of parchments and statements, as he leads you to the pirate port's unofficial claims house. It's a 2-story structure with warped floors, badly patched bullet holes, and a door that reads Veritas Maritime Affairs. The irony? Beautiful. Inside, half a dozen claimants wait their turn. Some hold boxes of wreckage, splintered masts, burnt fabric, a musket ball wrapped in seaweed. Others just stand there, confident in their charm and a well-rehearsed story. You settle in beside a man holding what appears to be a salted pig's tail. Spanish cannon hit the livestock pens, he mutters, as if that explains everything. So how did pirates prove their losses? Well, proof was often a performance, 1 part theater, 1 part half-truth, and 1 part confident delivery. Pirates and privateers didn't always have photos or receipts, but they did understand props. Damaged cargo, fake eyewitnesses, and dramatic logbook entries were all part of the toolkit. A mainstream historical fact. Many 17th century port authorities required sworn affidavits to validate shipping losses, especially for insured voyages. These were typically taken under oath by magistrates or appointed notaries. But in places like Nassau or Tortuga, where no real government existed, pirates created their own legal systems. Captains vouched for each other. Entire crews co-signed fabricated logs. Some even held staged inquiries in taverns, complete with jury and verdict. As you observe one such ritual, a loud-voiced man presents a large, salt-stained scroll to the local verifier, a wiry woman named Letty with ink-stained fingers and the facial expression of someone who hasn't believed anything in 12 years. And this, the man declares, is what remains of our sugar manifest. Letty barely glances at it before asking, "Why is it written on the back of a playing card?" The room chuckles. "Limited paper supply," he replies. She doesn't blink. Denied. You can see it's not just about the story. It's about how believable the story feels, and how willing the verifier is to go along with it. This is where reputation matters. Known captains with previous successful claims stand a better chance. Newcomers? They need extra flair. One crew even brought a live parrot that kept screaming, "We was robbed," in Spanish. Overkill? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Your quirky tidbit for this stop. Pirates occasionally faked injuries or even amputations to strengthen their claims. One man, dubbed Three-Finger Ned, filed claims in 3 separate ports, each time pretending to have lost a different limb. By the time he was caught, underwriters joked he had fewer body parts than a roasted chicken. Back in the room, a young first mate steps up with a box full of melted beeswax. "Used to be candles," he explains. "Ship caught fire mid-prayer." Letty raises an eyebrow. Did the prayer help? He shrugs. Not the ship, no. She nods slowly, then stamps the claim. Approved. Historians still argue whether these regional verifications were part of a broader conspiracy or just self-contained islands of corruption. Some believe underwriters back in London knew full well what went on in Nassau, but preferred not to ask questions. After all, insurance was about risk, not righteousness, and premiums spoke louder than oaths. You watch as another claimant presents what appears to be a musket bent at a 90-degree angle. A warning shot bounced, he explains, and hit our powder keg. Everyone stares. Letty closes her ledger, leans forward, and says, "Sir, are you claiming your ship exploded because of geometry?" A long pause. "Yes," he says solemnly, "and that somehow is enough." This system thrived on ambiguity. The ocean was vast, communication was slow, and pirates had become experts in managing both. Their loss verification rituals were flexible, portable, and surprisingly efficient. Yes, there were denials. But there were also patterns, insider knowledge, and enough successful claims to keep the practice alive, and even refined. You head upstairs, where documents are copied and stored in loose piles. One folder is labeled Partial Verifications, which, from the looks of it, includes anything that couldn't be fully disproven. One slip reads, Captain M reports cargo lost in mermaid attack. Further details pending. Outside, the sun has begun to dip. You step back onto the dusty path, just as a ship bell rings in the harbor. Another vessel docks, its sails torn but intact, and you already know the captain will be at Veritas within the hour, claiming he was boarded by ghost pirates or swallowed and spit back out by a sea monster. And who's to say he wasn't? You board a creaking ship bound for Jamaica this time, where the conversation among crew members isn't about gold or buried treasure, it's about underwriting. Yes, really. Because if pirate insurance has a secret backbone, it's not in the salty tales or forged manifests. It's in the underwriters who weighed the risks and decided which voyages were worth the gamble. Your shipmate, a former London clerk turned quartermaster, leans in as the hull groans beneath you. "See, the trick," he says, "is not if the claim is real. It's whether it's payable." And just like that, you're pulled into the curious, rule-twisting mind of the 17th century underwriter. Now imagine this. You're seated in a dim chamber above a coffee house near the Royal Exchange in London. The floor is sticky, the windows fogged, and there's a steady murmur of pens scratching and voices haggling. These are the early days of Lloyd's Coffee House, ground zero for maritime insurance. Here, men in powdered wigs and stained cuffs gamble on ships the same way you might bet on horses. They pass around thick ledgers with columns labeled ship name, captain, cargo, route, threat level. And of course, premium. Each underwriter subscribes to a portion of the policy, writing their name and liability percentage underneath the policy document, hence, underwriter. And yes, they knew some of these ships were run by pirates. In fact, they preferred it sometimes. Because pirates were ruthless about protecting cargo. Their crews were loyal, armed to the teeth, and had fewer rules slowing them down. Plus, they charged triple the premiums. High risk, high reward. Just don't ask too many questions about where the sugar came from. A mainstream historical fact. Lloyd's of London was formed during this period, and early underwriting was often done by individual speculators rather than corporate firms. Many policies were hand-drafted and insured on a per-voyage basis, meaning if the ship never returned, the underwriters lost their investment. This made every decision personal and every claim suspect. Back on your Jamaican ship, your captain pulls out an old insurance agreement tucked into a waterproof tube. It's brittle, ink-stained, and still smells faintly of sea salt and pipe smoke. "See that clause," he says, pointing to a faded line. Losses incurred by acts of war, piracy, or natural causes may be contested at the discretion of the insurer. He laughs. That's the get-out-of-jail-free line. Which brings you to the key dilemma for underwriters. What counts as a valid loss? Pirates, storms, sabotage, all risky. But if a captain accidentally sells his cargo in a friendly port and then claims it was taken by privateers, is that still a loss? Historians still argue whether 17th century underwriters were willfully blind or genuinely fooled by some of these stories. Some letters between insurers suggest they knew which claims were fishy, but chose to honor them anyway to maintain good relationships and keep those sweet, sweet premiums flowing. Now here's a fringe tidbit. One particularly eccentric underwriter named Jeremy Fish claimed he could judge the honesty of a claim by licking the paper it was written on. Too much salt, he insisted, means they soaked it for sympathy. Whether he was a fraud detector or just overly hydrated is still up for debate. You watch as the underwriters debate a policy. One proposes excluding acts of God from coverage unless witnessed by a member of the clergy. Another suggests only insuring ships that carry at least one literate crew member, for accurate journaling, he says. A third just shrugs and says, double the premium and pray they don't come back. This might seem chaotic, but it was remarkably effective. The underwriting process created a financial incentive for pirates to appear professional. Many ships began carrying dual manifests, one for the real cargo, one for the underwriters. Some even hired scribes to draft polished reports that would impress coffeehouse critics back in London. At sea, your own ship is caught in a squall, and for a moment you feel the brutal reality of it all. Waves slam the hull. Rain lashes your face. For every successful voyage, dozens failed, and not all claims were lies. Real losses, real danger. Insurance wasn't just a scam. It was a lifeline. You arrive in Kingston soaked and sore, but with a new appreciation for the weird, tangled bond between pirates and their pencil-pushing sponsors. The ship's captain strides into a waterfront tavern, opens his logbook, and begins writing a claim that, let's be honest, leans heavily on creative liberties. A crewman leans in and whispers, just enough truth to get paid. A familiar refrain. You watch the ink flow, the lies solidify, and the old system spin its rusty gears again. Somewhere, in a coffee house thousands of miles away, an underwriter will read this claim and make a decision based on probability, politics, and the scent of gold. And odds are, they'll pay it. You're still in Kingston when you hear a whisper on the wind, or maybe it's just the creaking of a rum barrel being rolled across the dock. Either way, the message is clear. If you really want to understand pirate insurance, you've got to meet the adjusters. And just like that, you're off again, trudging through humid alleys and past shouting vendors until you find a man with a monocle, 2 pistols, and a parrot that swears in Dutch. This is Elias Featherstone, shipwreck investigator, rumor magnet, and something like an early insurance adjuster, though he prefers the term truth merchant. He's the guy who shows up when a claim is a little too convenient. If you're filing for a sunken ship, Elias wants to see the splash marks. You trail behind him as he marches to the harbor. Look there, he says, pointing at a half-burnt schooner barely afloat. Captain claims Spanish privateers set it alight. But he fishes in his pocket and produces a scrap of red silk. Spanish flag was stitched inside out. Fabric came from Jamaica. He chuckles darkly. Pirates are bad tailors. So what did these early adjusters actually do? Well, they were part investigator, part enforcer, part reluctant therapist. When a pirate or privateer filed a claim, insurers sometimes dispatched men like Elias to verify it. Their methods ranged from interviews with local witnesses to diving expeditions with crude weighted baskets, and yes, even interrogating parrots, although that rarely yielded consistent testimony. A mainstream historical fact. By the late 17th century, large underwriters and syndicates began commissioning independent surveyors, usually sea captains, retired naval officers, or mercantile agents, to verify claims abroad. These men formed the earliest roots of modern insurance adjusting. They were not always impartial, many took bribes or were former pirates themselves. Still, their reports carried weight in courts and claims offices back in Europe. Elias leads you through a tavern and into the jungle edge, where locals reported debris from a merchant wreck. You reach a stream where fragments of barrels and broken glass bob in the shallows. See the label? He says, lifting a shard. Madeira wine, shipped from Lisbon, but the pirate who filed the claim insisted his cargo came from France. A tiny detail, but in this business, it's enough to kill a payout. Historians still argue whether these adjusters were effective at all, or just a layer of red tape slapped on to look official. Some were brave investigators, sure, But others were window dressing for an insurance system that knew it was being gamed and preferred it that way. As long as the losses didn't bankrupt the syndicate, everybody played along. Now here's a quirky tidbit. One adjuster, known only as Old Sour Toe, reportedly used human teeth as a rating system. 1 tooth equals probable fraud. 5 teeth equals full payout. No one's quite sure how he justified this, or why he carried so many teeth, but his reports were apparently taken very seriously. You return to town with Elias as he prepares his latest report. It's not handwritten, it's dictated to a former monk-turned-scribe who occasionally adds dramatic flair. Don't write that it seemed suspicious, Elias says. Say, evidence leans toward premeditated conflagration consistent with insurance fraud. The monk nods solemnly. Should I add lightning for drama? Elias considers. Just one bolt. In many cases, adjusters weren't just fact-checkers, they were negotiators. Some claims ended with a reduced payout, not a full denial. We'll cover your hull, but not the cargo. Or, you get the money, but we blacklist you for 6 months. This delicate dance kept pirates and insurers in a weirdly functional relationship. You sit in on one such negotiation. A scruffy captain insists his cargo of cured meats was entirely lost to sharks. The adjuster, a thin man with impeccable boots, nods politely, then produces a journal entry from a rival crew. Asterisk, saw him offloading salted pork to a tavern in Bridgetown. Asterisk, caught red-handed. But instead of voiding the claim, the adjuster offers a partial payout. Next time, he says, lie better. Pirates, for their part, learned how to adjust their stories for the adjusters. They created fake maps, planted wreckage, and even rehearsed their testimonies. Some hired actors to play injured crew. Others bribed local authorities to witness events that never happened. It was an elaborate dance of storytelling, proof staging, and plausible deniability. And adjusters? They often respected the craft. I once gave full payout to a man who faked a Dutch attack using only palm fronds and red paint, Elias tells you, tipping his hat. Because honestly, that level of commitment deserves something. The longer you hang around with these so-called truth merchants, the more you realize they don't necessarily want to find the truth. They want to find enough truth to keep the system from collapsing. Because the system, pirates, merchants, underwriters, adjusters, it all relies on this careful balancing act. Too much denial, and pirates stop buying policies. Too much fraud, and insurers pull out. So everyone agrees, silently, to keep the theater running. You leave Elias as he heads toward his next wreck investigation, this one supposedly attacked by ghostly monks wielding grappling hooks. He sighs, scribbles, highly unlikely, and slaps a payout stamp on the paperwork anyway. Business as usual, he mutters. The next leg of your journey takes you away from the bustling ports and into a quieter world, the Caribbean back channels, where secrets pass more easily than ships. You're aboard a small sloop now, gliding through narrow channels and mangrove tunnels toward a lesser-known hideout on the island of Hispaniola. It's not marked on maps, but pirates know it well. It's where deals happen, quiet ones, off the books, and sometimes off the moral compass entirely. You arrive just before sunset. The hideout is little more than a circle of shacks, a dock, and a one-room structure humorously labeled the Treasury. Inside, a large table, a hammock, and stacks of documents, many of them insurance-related. This, your guide explains, is where pirates processed internal insurance, informal, crew-funded safety nets meant to fill the gaps when proper claims were rejected or unavailable. Yes, pirate insurance fraud was real, but so were legitimate efforts at collective protection. Some crews pooled portions of their plunder into a common chest. They called it many names: the Red Barrel, Captain's Cushion, the Dead Box. Whatever the title, it served one purpose: to support crewmen after a loss, particularly if the official underwriters back in Europe decided to reassess terms, which was polite speak for not today, lads. A mainstream historical fact: privateer ships, especially those operating under letters of marque, were often required to maintain internal ledgers detailing shares of loot and disaster provisions. These ledgers were inspected by naval authorities, or at least were meant to be. For pirates, it evolved into informal but surprisingly robust self-insurance systems. As you thumb through a weathered ledger, you see entries like James, lost right hand to cannon, paid 20 gold. Marley, ship struck reef, partial restitution approved. Henrik, lied about the reef, no payout. It wasn't always generous, and it definitely wasn't democratic. Captains often acted as judge, jury, and treasurer. If you were in their good books, you got paid. If not, well, you could always try your luck with a sob story in Port Royal. Historians still argue whether these internal systems were proto-insurance cooperatives or just slush funds maintained by charismatic leaders. Some call them noble. Others say they were just another form of control. Keep the crew loyal, and you control the purse strings. One crew you meet, the Calico Rats, even maintains a formal appeals board made of 3 senior crew members and a talking macaw named Sister Mabel, who screeches whenever someone lies. She's never wrong, their quartermaster insists. You're skeptical until you watch her interrupt a teary-eyed deckhand with a loud "nope" just as he claims a musket ball injury. Turns out the mark was from a cork. In these circles, claims weren't based on paperwork but on reputation. If you were known to pull your weight and fight hard, you'd likely be supported in times of need. But woe to the man who slacked, hoarded, or fibbed one too many times. There's a scratched-out entry in the ledger labeled simply, Arthur, exiled for exaggeration. That's right, he wasn't just denied a payout. He was kicked off the ship. Sometimes, these internal funds even paid ransoms. When crew were captured by rival pirates or Spanish authorities, the collective pot was tapped to negotiate releases. One letter you read is written in painfully polite Spanish, asking a governor in Cartagena to please return our most hygienic cook. It ends with, P.S. We'll also throw in a goat. Your quirky tidbit for this leg: one crew reportedly stored their self-insurance fund in the form of a pet pig fattened on rum-soaked bread. The plan was that in the event of a disaster, they'd roast the pig, sell the meat at inflated port prices, and divide the proceeds. Sadly, the pig escaped during a cannon test. The crew mourned and declared a day of financial regret. These pirate-run mutual funds weren't foolproof, of course. Some were looted, mismanaged, or mysteriously disappeared the same night the captain bought a new hat. And occasionally, they'd find themselves in moral knots. Should they pay out to a crewman who'd technically deserted after the incident, or to a family if a pirate died doing something extremely stupid? But in their own anarchic way, they worked. In places where formal insurance systems were unreachable or unwilling, pirates took care of their own. You watch as a vote is held under torchlight. A young sailor lost an eye, by barrel, not blade, as he admits. His crew debates whether drunken injury qualifies as an insurable incident. After 5 minutes and 1 swig of spiced rum, they nod. He was loyal. Payout approved. At the edge of the hideout, a carved plaque reads, "We cover our own." It's chipped, crooked, and barely legible. But in the flickering torchlight, it feels like gospel. You wake up to a salty breeze and the sound of boots stomping on deck. The ship you've hitched a ride with, an aging brigantine called the Honest Deceiver, is headed for one of the Caribbean's most lucrative routes, the Spanish Main. But you're not here for treasure this time. You're here for paper trails. Because where there's gold, there's paperwork. And where there's paperwork, there's forgery. Turns out, even in the swashbuckling world of 17th century piracy, documentation mattered. In fact, it often made the difference between a successful insurance claim and a laughable rejection. So naturally, pirates got creative. The quartermaster, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a suspiciously elegant accent, hands you a bundle of ship's logs. Every voyage needs a convincing narrative, he explains. Storm damage, hostile encounters, noble sacrifice, on paper at least. You flip through the pages and notice something off. One storm, apparently, lasted 17 days and was accompanied by lightning of a biblical hue. Another entry claims the ship outran 3 French frigates using pure nautical courage. You've just been handed a forged logbook, carefully crafted to support an insurance claim for a cargo that never existed, on a voyage that only kind of happened. It's a literary masterpiece of half-truths, vague coordinates, and just enough saltwater stains to seem legitimate. Mainstream historical fact? By the 1670s, pirates and privateers regularly altered or forged ships' manifests, logs, and letters of marque. Some used real clerks on their payrolls. Others bribed port officials to backdate arrivals or insert false cargo records. London underwriters received hundreds of such documents, many of which were copied and recopied so often even they lost track of what was real. You learn quickly that certain phrases became red flags to seasoned insurers. Ship lost in sudden fog was one. Cargo vanished under moonlight was another. And captain not available for comment was practically an admission of guilt. But pirates knew this, so they adapted. They replaced grandiose tales with overly dry, bureaucratic language. One log simply states, minor hull compromise due to hostile encounter. All standard procedures followed. Awaiting instructions. It reads like a board intern wrote it, but that's exactly the point. Historians still argue whether these forgeries were truly convincing or just tolerated by insurers eager to keep business flowing. Some letters between adjusters hint at an open secret. Captain Stroud's logs are fiction, but his payments are punctual. Which is a poetic way of saying, let it slide. Your quirky tidbit this time? A particularly ambitious pirate named Obadiah Crane reportedly forged a claim for a ship that never existed. The entire vessel, the Morning Hound, was a fabrication. He created logs, a crew roster, and even paid a tavern singer to write a sea shanty about it. The claim made it all the way to a payout before someone noticed the coordinates pointed to approximately the center of a plantation field in Barbados. Back on the Honest Deceiver, you're introduced to the ship's scribe, a flamboyant fellow with powdered cheeks and a flair for drama. Accuracy is useful, he says, dipping his quill. But narrative sells. He then pens a new incident, a skirmish with Portuguese smugglers near a reef. No one corrects him. You suspect the incident never happened, but you also suspect it'll show up on a Lloyd's claim next month. Forgery didn't stop at logs. Pirates also replicated cargo manifests, damage assessments, and even letters of support from colonial governors. One popular trick? Copying a genuine insurance claim from a wrecked ship and changing just enough details to make it look new. With no centralized database and mail delays of weeks or months, it worked more often than you'd expect. You sit in on a document rehearsal, a practice session where the captain and officers run through their fabricated voyage, making sure everyone remembers the script. Remember, it was 3 Spanish galleons, not 2, the captain corrects. And the rum was taken by cannon, not sea spray. You begin to appreciate the bizarre theater of it all. The lies aren't just told, they're curated, edited, and sometimes beautifully performed. The goal isn't to dupe some faceless institution, but to play within a game where everyone, pirates, underwriters, even adjusters, knows the rules, even if those rules are made of salt and fantasy. There's a moment that sticks with you. A young sailor practicing his injured but heroic face in the mirror. He adjusts his sling, scowls slightly and mutters, "The cannonball came from port side, not stern, port side." It's equal parts tragic and hilarious, and you suddenly realize that for many pirates, acting wasn't a luxury. It was survival. Forgery wasn't always clean, though. Some claims fell apart spectacularly. A captain once submitted 2 logs for the same voyage, forgetting to change the name of the ship's dog. Another claimed damage from a storm on a date when all nearby ports recorded perfect weather. These mistakes weren't just embarrassing, they could get you blacklisted, or worse, quietly retired by your own crew. And still, the system endured. As your ship sails toward Havana, the scribe begins working on another set of documents. He asks you, what sounds more believable, lost in fog or struck by floating timber? You shrug. Why not both? He grins. Bold. I like it. And with that, another fake claim begins to take shape, carefully worded, delicately aged, and ready to be filed the moment they hit port. All it needs now is the right signature and a dash of seawater for effect. Because in the end, pirate insurance wasn't just about claims, it was about stories. And the best story? That's the one that gets you paid. You dock in Havana under a sky the color of bruised mango, and as the sails are lowered and ropes are thrown, your attention drifts from pirates to paper pushers. Because here, in this sun-scorched corner of colonial bureaucracy, sits the final gatekeeper of every insurance claim, the colonial court. It's less marble halls and more termite-bitten benches, but don't be fooled. What happens here determines whether a captain walks away with gold or with a scolding and a black mark beside his name. And today, you're here to see how the sausage gets judged. You slip into the back of the open-air chamber. Flies buzz, wigs wilt, and a sleepy magistrate, who smells faintly of tobacco and regret, calls the next case. The petition of Captain Jonas Finch versus the Honorable Syndicate of Lloyd's Underwriting. The captain enters in full dramatic flair, one arm in a sling, the other dramatically clutching a water-stained logbook. You've seen this act before. You almost applaud. This isn't a criminal trial, mind you, it's a financial drama. Pirates, privateers, and even merchant captains came here to appeal denied claims, dispute payout amounts, or argue over clause interpretations. Think of it like Judge Judy, but with more rum and fewer commercial breaks. A mainstream historical fact: colonial courts in major ports like Havana, Kingston, and Bridgetown were legally empowered to arbitrate maritime insurance claims on behalf of European underwriters. Though technically neutral, these courts were often staffed by officials with strong local ties or strong personal biases. Decisions could be swayed by testimony, bribes, or just sheer narrative charm. Captain Finch begins his plea. His ship, he claims, was ravaged by a sudden squall of great biblical ferocity while carrying a legitimate shipment of spices. The insurer's adjuster, however, disputes that the cargo was ever on board. So the question becomes, was the storm real? Was the cargo real? And more importantly, can Finch prove it? Historians still argue whether these courts genuinely upheld maritime law or merely rubber-stamped whichever party had more influence. Some rulings preserved trade order. Others looked suspiciously like bribes written in cursive. One British naval officer even wrote, "Our colonial magistrate sees justice like a crow sees coins, shiny things come first." You watch as witnesses are paraded in. A cook who distinctly remembers the cumin. A cabin boy who swears he tied down crates marked spices before the storm hit. The adjuster counters with port records showing no cargo loaded. It becomes clear that both sides are spinning yarns. One just happens to be better at embroidery. And here's your quirky tidbit. In one infamous case, a court granted a partial payout for a ship that had allegedly been attacked by sky spirits. The captain insisted his hull had been cracked open by celestial spears. The judge, after several stiff drinks, ruled that such phenomena, while undocumented, are not necessarily uninsurable. It's still cited in law schools, well, in the fun law schools. Colonial courts didn't operate on strict evidence the way modern ones do. They favored compelling witnesses, detailed storytelling, and, occasionally, dramatic reenactments. You watch as Captain Finch dramatically sprinkles a handful of peppercorns on the floor, claiming it's all that remains of his spice cargo. The magistrate leans forward. "Is that Sumatran?" he asks, impressed. "Advantage, Finch." But things could turn quickly. In another case you glimpse in the records, a claim was thrown out when a parrot blurted out, "He made it up," during the hearing. The court took it as divine intervention. Birds, the ultimate whistleblowers. You're surprised to learn that some pirates even loved the courtroom setting. It gave them a stage. There are records of captains who hired traveling actors to play injured crew, complete with fake bandages and tearful monologues. Some even dressed children in rags to pass them off as orphans of dead mates, hoping for sympathy payouts. You catch up with a clerk after the session. She's sharp-eyed and quicker with ink than most lawyers are with words. "It's all theater," she tells you, but even theater needs rules. She shows you a thick book of standard maritime clauses: act of God, loss by enemy action, mutiny without provocation, and the always vague incidents unforeseen. The ambiguity was the point, terms wide enough to sail a three-masted schooner through. The clerk explains how local judges were often under pressure to keep commerce flowing. A harsh ruling against a popular captain could spark unrest, or even a boycott of insurance policies in the port. So compromise became an art. They call it justice, she smirks. I call it damage control. You return to the courtroom just as the ruling is issued in the Finch case. The magistrate adjusts his wig, clears his throat, and declares, "The loss is hereby deemed partially justifiable." The court awards payment for hull and provisions, but denies compensation for cargo due to insufficient documentation. Finch bows deeply. He's lost some, but he's won enough. Outside, he offers you a wink and a peppercorn. Never underestimate the power of smell, he says. You pocket the spice. Honestly, it smells a little like fraud. As the courthouse empties, you realize something important. These weren't just places of law, they were pressure valves. When pirates felt cheated by insurers, or when insurers grew suspicious of captains, the colonial court was where everyone aired their dirty linen, often while trying to pretend it wasn't dirty at all. You pass a notice board on the way out. It reads, "Next week, the case of the exploding rum keg." You pause. That one sounds promising. The moon hangs low as you walk along a quiet dock, its silver light painting the world in pale gradients. Somewhere behind you, a fiddler plays a lazy reel, and the sea gently slaps against worn hulls. You're heading to your next stop, a place that makes even hardened pirates nervous, the underwriters' chamber. You duck into a squat brick building at the edge of the port. No sails, no flags, no swagger. Just walls thick with damp and secrets. This is where risk meets gold, and where gold gets stingy. You're greeted by Master Templeton, an underwriter so dry he makes the desert feel damp. He's in his 60s, with spectacles he wears halfway down his nose and a voice that sounds like paper being folded. "Welcome to the ledger end of piracy," he says. "You'll find fewer pistols here, but plenty of sharp knives. All metaphorical. Mostly. Here, the flamboyant drama of claimants meets the cold scrutiny of numbers. Templeton's desk is stacked with folders marked pending, flagged, and the always unnerving dubious. He gestures to a dusty set of scales. "Used to be for gold," he says. "Now it's for truth." A mainstream historical fact. Lloyd's of London and other early underwriters operated using syndicates, groups of investors who jointly shared the risk of maritime voyages. Each policy was underwritten line by line, literally, as each investor signed their name beneath the last. Hence the term underwriter. Templeton takes you through the 3 questions every pirate policy must answer. 1. Was the voyage legal? 2. Was the loss legitimate? 3. Was the claimant persuasive? You're surprised how many answers begin with "technically," followed by a long sigh. Today, he's reviewing a claim involving the Maiden's Wager, a sloop that allegedly lost its rum cargo to a French privateer near Martinique. The problem? The attack happened in an area known for calm seas and slow trade, and, according to Templeton's charts, the Maiden's Wager had been reported docked at Nassau 2 days after the alleged encounter. He calls in his junior, Miss Penfold, a young woman with ink-stained fingers and a mind like a filing cabinet full of machetes. She cross-references logs, weather reports, and crew rosters. "This smells of embellishment," she says, "but not necessarily fraud." Historians still argue whether underwriters genuinely aimed to curb deception or simply priced it into the system. Some believe claims were rejected only when they were sloppy. Others argue insurers tolerated some degree of fiction so long as it kept trade flowing and reputations intact. After all, a system clogged with too many denials becomes a system no one trusts. Here's your quirky tidbit. A well-known underwriter in Port Royal was famous for betting against his own claims. If he denied a payout, he'd offer odds in a local tavern that the claimant wouldn't come back alive. One time he lost, and paid in rum for a year. Templeton shows you the tools of his trade. There's a salt-crusted compass, used to check voyage plausibility, a water clock, for comparing weather claims, and something he calls the gut quill, a pen used only when something feels off. Hard to prove, he says, but the quill rarely lies. You watch as he reads through a testimonial from a witness who swears to a surprise attack by Dutch pirates. Templeton frowns. Dutch pirates haven't worked that route in 7 years. And this man says they had parrots. Penfold sighs. Too much flair. Always the parrots. It becomes clear that adjusting wasn't just about rejecting claims. It was about reading people. Templeton shares stories of captains who cried real tears, of quartermasters who recited every damaged crate, of wives who brought in their husbands' sea-worn boots to prove he was truly gone. You learn to see the space between desperation and deceit, he says. They don't always look different. You ask him how many claims are outright lies. He gives a tired smile. Outright? Maybe 1 in 5. But embellished? 9 in 10. Still, most get at least partial payouts. The sea's unpredictable. If you can survive it, you've earned something, even if your story's a little salty. You're handed a sample policy, short, dense, and full of ominous phrases like acts of God, general average, and perils of the sea. Penfold explains how ambiguous wording helped underwriters remain flexible. You'd be amazed how much can be crammed under perils. Shark attacks, mutinies, collapsing rum barrels. And here comes the callback. You remember Madame Loretta's advice. Never use the word suspicious. Turns out, that's one of Templeton's triggers. Suspicious? I'll show you what's suspicious, look here. Same ship filed claims from Jamaica and Barbados on the same day. He taps the page hard enough to leave a dent. By now, the air in the chamber is thick with candle smoke and old seawater ink. The room feels like a blend of courtroom, confession booth, and accountancy nightmare. And yet, it's clear this place is crucial. Without someone to push back, the entire system would capsize. As night deepens, Templeton pulls out a letter he's been dreading. It's from a claimant who lost everything. His ship, his crew, even his own leg. The story is gut-wrenching, and the paperwork is flawless. But the ship's registration lapsed 6 months ago, meaning technically, it wasn't insured. He reads the letter twice, rubs his eyes, and signs a partial payout order anyway. A courtesy, he says quietly, or a bribe to fate. You leave the chamber with more respect than you expected. Sure, these underwriters were cold, but they weren't heartless. They were the tightrope walkers of an economy built on risk, rumor, and wreckage. If pirates were the storm, these people were the anchors. Back outside, the stars burn steady. You hear a distant cheer from the tavern. Probably someone celebrating a successful claim. Or maybe just someone who thinks it'll go through. Either way, one thing's for sure. Behind every doubloon lies a stack of paper, and someone brave, or bored, enough to believe it. The moon hangs low as you walk along a quiet dock, its silver light painting the world in pale gradients. Somewhere behind you, a fiddler plays a lazy reel, and the sea gently slaps against worn hulls. You're heading to your next stop, a place that makes even hardened pirates nervous, the underwriters' chamber. You duck into a squat brick building at the edge of the port. No sails, no flags, no swagger. Just walls thick with damp and secrets. This is where risk meets gold, and where gold gets stingy. You're greeted by Master Templeton, an underwriter so dry he makes the desert feel damp. He's in his 60s, with spectacles he wears halfway down his nose and a voice that sounds like paper being folded. Welcome to the ledger end of piracy, he says. You'll find fewer pistols here, but plenty of sharp knives. All metaphorical. Mostly. Here, the flamboyant drama of claimants meets the cold scrutiny of numbers. Templeton's desk is stacked with folders marked pending, flagged, and the always unnerving dubious. He gestures to a dusty set of scales. Used to be for gold, he says. Now it's for truth. A mainstream historical fact. Lloyd's of London and other early underwriters operated using syndicates, groups of investors who jointly shared the risk of maritime voyages. Each policy was underwritten line by line, literally, as each investor signed their name beneath the last. Hence the term underwriter. Templeton takes you through the 3 questions every pirate policy must answer. 1. Was the voyage legal? 2. Was the loss legitimate? 3. Was the claimant persuasive? You're surprised how many answers begin with technically, followed by a long sigh. Today, he's reviewing a claim involving the Maiden's Wager, a sloop that allegedly lost its rum cargo to a French privateer near Martinique. The problem? The attack happened in an area known for calm seas and slow trade, and, according to Templeton's charts, the Maiden's Wager had been reported docked at Nassau 2 days after the alleged encounter. He calls in his junior, Miss Penfold, a young woman with ink-stained fingers and a mind like a filing cabinet full of machetes. She cross-references logs, weather reports, and crew rosters. This smells of embellishment, she says, but not necessarily fraud. Historians still argue whether underwriters genuinely aimed to curb deception or simply priced it into the system. Some believe claims were rejected only when they were sloppy. Others argue insurers tolerated some degree of fiction so long as it kept trade flowing and reputations intact. After all, a system clogged with too many denials becomes a system no one trusts. Here's your quirky tidbit. A well-known underwriter in Port Royal was famous for betting against his own claims. If he denied a payout, he'd offer odds in a local tavern that the claimant wouldn't come back alive. One time he lost, and paid in rum for a year. Templeton shows you the tools of his trade. There's a salt-crusted compass, used to check voyage plausibility, a water clock, for comparing weather claims, and something he calls the gut quill, a pen used only when something feels off. Hard to prove, he says, but the quill rarely lies. You watch as he reads through a testimonial from a witness who swears to a surprise attack by Dutch pirates. Templeton frowns. Dutch pirates haven't worked that route in 7 years. And this man says they had parrots. Penfold sighs. Too much flair. Always the parrots. It becomes clear that adjusting wasn't just about rejecting claims. It was about reading people. Templeton shares stories of captains who cried real tears, of quartermasters who recited every damaged crate, of wives who brought in their husbands' sea-worn boots to prove he was truly gone. You learn to see the space between desperation and deceit, he says. They don't always look different. You ask him how many claims are outright lies. He gives a tired smile. Outright? Maybe 1 in 5. But embellished? 9 in 10. Still, most get at least partial payouts. The sea's unpredictable. If you can survive it, you've earned something, even if your story's a little salty. You're handed a sample policy, short, dense, and full of ominous phrases like acts of God, general average, and perils of the sea. Penfold explains how ambiguous wording helped underwriters remain flexible. You'd be amazed how much can be crammed under perils. Shark attacks, mutinies, collapsing rum barrels. And here comes the callback. You remember Madame Loretta's advice. Never use the word suspicious. Turns out, that's one of Templeton's triggers. Suspicious? I'll show you what's suspicious, look here. Same ship filed claims from Jamaica and Barbados on the same day. He taps the page hard enough to leave a dent. By now, the air in the chamber is thick with candle smoke and old seawater ink. The room feels like a blend of courtroom, confession booth, and accountancy nightmare. And yet, it's clear this place is crucial. Without someone to push back, the entire system would capsize. As night deepens, Templeton pulls out a letter he's been dreading. It's from a claimant who lost everything. His ship, his crew, even his own leg. The story is gut-wrenching, and the paperwork is flawless. But the ship's registration lapsed 6 months ago, meaning technically, it wasn't insured. He reads the letter twice, rubs his eyes, and signs a partial payout order anyway. A courtesy, he says quietly, or a bribe to fate. You leave the chamber with more respect than you expected. Sure, these underwriters were cold, but they weren't heartless. They were the tightrope walkers of an economy built on risk, rumor, and wreckage. If pirates were the storm, these people were the anchors. Back outside, the stars burn steady. You hear a distant cheer from the tavern. Probably someone celebrating a successful claim. Or maybe just someone who thinks it'll go through. Either way, one thing's for sure. Behind every doubloon lies a stack of paper, and someone brave, or bored, enough to believe it. You wake to the low thrum of ship bells and gull cries as you step into a place most pirates loathed and most insurers adored, the records vault. Tucked beneath the governor's mansion and guarded by a sleepy sentry with one eye and 2 mugs of coffee, this stone labyrinth houses the paper trail of every claim, counterclaim, and curious denial made in the last half-century. It smells like moldy parchment and very old lies. A wizened archivist named Cuthbert meets you with a candle and a scowl. Follow closely. The rats like newcomers. You do. The path winds between iron shelves packed with folders wrapped in oilskin, each marked by ship name, date, and a one-word summary like accepted, rejected, or occasionally hilarious. Cuthbert has been down here for decades. He walks with a limp, possibly from a fall, or possibly from tripping over a particularly aggressive footnote. This place, he mutters, is where the truth either goes to die or become very inconvenient. Your first stop is a stack of claims from the notorious Crimson Whimsy, a ship famous for surviving 8 storms, 3 fires, and 1 monkey mutiny. The file contains not just logs and receipts, but notes scrawled in the margins by adjusters, underwriters, and the occasional anonymous informant. Cargo, mysteriously, always includes an exploding barrel, one writes. Another adds, Captain refuses to explain third-degree burns on Parrot. A mainstream historical fact. Colonial ports were required to maintain insurance registries for merchant and privateering vessels. These documents were considered legal records, referenced in trade disputes and, occasionally, used as evidence in criminal trials. Some even made their way to London or Amsterdam, shipped like treasure, just drier. Cuthbert shows you a particularly contested document, a claim from 1692 where a pirate captain alleged his ship was attacked by a ghost fleet glowing pale green in the mist. The insurer rejected the claim, citing hallucinations from spoiled rum. The court later overruled them after 3 other captains reported similar sightings. Historians still argue whether the Green Fleet incident was a weather phenomenon, a hallucination, or an elaborate insurance scam coordinated between friends. But it made its way into legend, and oddly, several underwriter training manuals. Here's your quirky tidbit. The term dead claim walking came from this vault. It referred to paperwork so improbable, yet so meticulously crafted that no one dared reject it outright, but no one wanted to approve it either. So it was filed, refiled, passed around, and eventually buried here. Some vault clerks even gave them tiny funerals. You pass by a room labeled Resolved with Bribes. Cuthbert doesn't go in. That room bites, he says. In another corner sits a shelf of policy evolution, where you see how clauses changed over time. The original policies were loose, almost poetic. Shall be compensated if the sea turns cruel. But as fraud evolved, so did language. By 1710, policies were stuffed with dense jargon, conditions, and impossible exceptions. One includes losses incurred while intoxicated, bewitched, or dueling with aquatic mammals shall not be honored. You squint at a file labeled The 2 Captains Named Jasper. Turns out, 2 different pirates filed claims on the same stolen cargo, using the same ship name. The vault contains both cases, each full of sworn testimonies, receipts, and drawings of identical cats who perished in the blaze. The adjuster added a note. Will approve neither until one Jasper admits the other exists. Neither did. The claim expired. Cuthbert leads you to a wall of whisper-thin ledgers with one peculiar title, Uncollected. These are approved payouts that were never claimed. But maybe the claimant died. Maybe the payout wasn't worth the return trip. Or maybe, and this chills you slightly, they were never meant to be real in the first place. In one file, a crew claimed they'd been swallowed by a whale and lived in the stomach cavity for 3 days. The court somehow approved it. The money sat waiting. No one ever came to get it. Sometimes, Cuthbert says, people win a lie so well they're too scared to spend it. You ask if anyone ever tries to steal or alter records down here. He gives a knowing smile. Only once. A crew came in disguised as dock inspectors. Tried to burn their denial file. You ask what happened. He points at a scorched beam and says, they learned parchment may be flammable, but Cuthbert is fireproof. He's joking. You hope. He leads you to a stone pedestal with a book resting in velvet. This, he whispers, is the ledger of first losses. It's where the earliest underwriters documented the original pirate insurance claims, long before the practice was widespread. The handwriting is erratic, but the stories are wild. One claim describes a ship attacked by a flaming wheel in the sky. Another was struck by a curse after denying a mermaid passage. You stare at these entries and realize something. Insurance for pirates was never just about risk. It was about belief. About getting someone to believe your version of chaos long enough to write you a check. As you leave the vault, Cuthbert pats a stack of folders and says, "These are next week's. All freshly soaked in salt water, all claiming acts of God." You ask if any are legit. He laughs. "Legit? Son, this is piracy. We settle for believable." The sun is setting as you emerge, casting golden rays across the harbor. A few ships bob at anchor, and you wonder how many of their captains have claims waiting in Cuthbert's archive. How many have already been paid for storms they never saw, or battles they only imagined? You realize this vault is more than a record keeper. It's a museum of desperation, creativity, and paperwork so audacious it sometimes earns the payout purely out of respect. And with that, you make your way to your final destination, where pirates meet peace, or at least, the illusion of it. You reach the edge of town, where the cobblestones fade into sand and the scent of sea salt sharpens in the evening breeze. There's a rickety building here, half inn, half temple, known among sailors as the Widow's Rest. If the claims offices were where stories got edited, this is where they came to rest. You duck inside, the wood groaning under your weight, and are greeted by the soft murmur of voices, clinking glasses, and the long sigh of a concertina player in the corner. This is where pirates and their families go when the voyage is over, whether by retirement, injury, or the far more common method, death. A chalkboard behind the bar reads, "In memoriam of every honest lie that got someone home." You settle in beside a fire, and before long, you're joined by a retired quartermaster named Silas, who wears 3 rings and walks like he's still swaying with the sea. He sips a dark rum and leans in with a smile. "So, you've been studying pirate insurance. The stories. The schemes." He raises his mug. "Bet you figured out they weren't just about money." You nod, unsure if this is a test or a sermon. Silas chuckles. "See, the claims were always 2 things. A way to keep the ship funded, and a way to explain the chaos. You lose a friend to cannon fire? Easier to call it an act of God and get paid, than admit he bled out in your arms while you froze." A mainstream historical fact. Pirate crews often pooled resources into communal funds. These acted like informal insurance schemes, used to compensate injured mates, pay for funerals, or support families. While not recognized by European banks, these funds were taken seriously among crews. Refusing to pay and marked you as untrustworthy, sometimes worse than mutiny. Silas points to a dusty book on the mantel. That's the sea chest ledger. Inside are handwritten notes from dozens of pirates, recording payouts made not through courts, but through crew agreements. One entry reads, "Gave one's widow 8 shares. He died singing. She cried, then laughed." You ask Silas if all the stories were true. He shrugs. "True? Useful? Absolutely." He tells you about a captain who once faked his own death, filed a claim through a cousin, and used the money to buy a tavern. This tavern, in fact. Course, someone found out years later and wrote a song about it. Now we all sing it every solstice. Here's your quirky tidbit. Pirate funerals often included staged testimonies. A man might die on Monday, and by Wednesday, 5 crewmates were rehearsing how he heroically rescued the sails before the mast exploded. These stories were submitted with claims, not just to get paid, but to preserve the fallen's dignity. "Even liars deserve a legacy," Silas mutters. Historians still argue whether these funeral tales helped or hindered historical records. Some insist they've muddled centuries of maritime truth. Others say they're an early form of folk historiography, truth reshaped to serve memory, not bureaucracy. In the back corner of the Widow's Rest, there's a painted mural called The Final Claim. It shows a skeleton captain handing a parchment to Neptune himself, who reads it with a smirk. Below, the words, "Even in death, you must explain yourself." You find yourself chuckling at that. Because after everything, consultants, adjusters, archives, it comes down to one unchanging truth. Pirates lived in the gray areas. Between storm and calm, between honesty and fraud, between life and legend. Insurance wasn't just a safety net. It was a canvas. A chance to rewrite disaster as something noble, clever, even divine. Silas raises his glass one last time. To every crew that faked it just well enough to get paid. And to the underwriters who pretended not to notice. Outside, the night is quiet. The stars feel closer somehow, the sky wide and forgiving. You walk the beach alone, boots sinking in the cool sand, and you start to understand why some pirates preferred paperwork to plundering. At least with paper, the danger ends when the ink dries. A breeze carries the faint tune of a sea shanty behind you. It's off-key and half-remembered, but it sounds like the closing credits to a long, stormy tale. And then the wind softens. Wind down 300 words. And now we slow the waves. Let them roll gently against the hull of your imagination. The sails have lowered, the coins have been counted, and the stories, oh, the stories, have been tucked back into their ledgers. Some were true. Others, lovingly exaggerated. But all of them, in their own way, were part of something bigger. The need to bring order to chaos, even if you had to do it with a fountain pen and a bit of flair. You walk one last time through that Caribbean night. The air is heavy with brine and jasmine. A candle flickers behind a shuttered window. Someone hums a lullaby in a tongue you don't recognize. Every creak of wood, every whisper of the tide, feels like a page being turned slowly, lovingly, toward its end. The pirates we met tonight weren't monsters. They were storytellers. Survivors. Some were tricksters, sure. But most were just sailors trying to make sense of a world that didn't always offer fairness, unless you wrote your own version of it. And in the quiet that follows, you smile. Because deep down, you get it. You understand why they did it. So let your breath ease. Let your thoughts drift out like driftwood on a slow current. You're safe now. The storm's behind you. The claims have been filed. The vault is locked. And Neptune, somewhere beneath the surface, is smiling as he reads the fine print. Sleep easy, sailor.